Let's move on to now talk about how to reach out to the people that you find on LinkedIn. And just to kind of simplify it, there's a few different ways to reach out to the people you find on LinkedIn. So the most common thing that I think salespeople do is they send an invitation to connect. You find someone on LinkedIn, there's a big button that says invite to connect. You can send an email through LinkedIn to the LinkedIn inbox to contacts. You can also send a traditional email, an email to the contact's business email inbox or their personal email, basically their inbox that's outside of LinkedIn. And you know what? You can also call the prospect. This is something that I think people don't really do much when it comes to, finding people on LinkedIn. But believe it or not, you can pick up the phone and call these people. So at the most basic level, you have these 4 different ways to reach out to the people you find on LinkedIn. I just want to kind of go through each 4 of those and talk about some pros and cons and things you should factor in and think about when you're trying to think about how to reach out to the people you find. Now, one of the things about inviting to connect is that it's extremely easy to send invitations and to get connected with very high value, difficult to reach contacts like executives at companies, owners of businesses. So that's great. And there's a big button, click invite to connect, and there's a very good chance that they may accept your request. Once you become connections, you can send messages directly to their LinkedIn inbox. Once you become connections, you probably know this, but you get access to additional contact information, like you might be able to access their phone number or their email address. And one of the best things about inviting to connect and becoming connections is that you can broadcast messages through your newsfeed to all of your connections. And one way to use this is to broadcast updates that deliver value of some sort to your network. So you can share industry information, some information of value. So that can either be helpful information, tips, could be something entertaining, something interesting. But one of the great things about broadcasting is that for your connections that see your messages, it helps you to stay fresh in their mind. So maybe you had a meeting with someone in the past. When they see your updates, they're reminded that you're who you are and that you're out there. Now, some cons with inviting to connect is that I personally believe when you send an invitation to someone to say, hey, let's become LinkedIn connections, I personally believe that you need to be cautious about directly selling to that individual. It's not to say that you can't sell to them. It's just that an invitation to connect is almost more collegial or friendly. Let's become connections and network and work together and collaborate. It should not be used as or seen as an invitation for you to try to sell to them. And the reason why I think that's rude is that you may be on LinkedIn to sell your products, to promote your business, to make money, right? But when someone accepts your invitation to connect, they're not accepting the opportunity to buy from you. It's not like a trade show where at a trade show you have vendors and you have buyers, and they're going to exchange, meaning the one party's looking to sell and one party's looking to buy. So you have this marketplace where everybody's on the same page and it's okay to be open about directly selling and exchanging information and cards. And that's not what LinkedIn is. LinkedIn is not a marketplace of buyers and sellers. It's definitely a place of sellers. But on the other side of that are networkers is what you should look at them as, because most people are on LinkedIn to either promote their career, connect with and stay in contact with colleagues and friends, and share information. Or the other people are on LinkedIn to sell their own products and services. So they're on there to do the same thing you are, but they're not there to buy your products and services. So I'm not saying that you can't sell to these people, but when you become connections, you should be cautious about directly selling to them. So it's almost as though you need to be a little bit more delayed in how you approach them in terms of when you try to sell to them after connecting, or you might want to go a little bit more indirectly where you try to establish a relationship and a partnership, and then you see what opportunities can come out of that. We'll talk about that here in a minute. Another thing to factor in is I said that you'll get their email address when you become connections, and a lot of people send invitations to connect in order just to solely get someone's email address. Well, the bad news is you have a 50% chance of getting someone's personal email address. For example, I've been on LinkedIn for a very long time, and the entire time that I've been on LinkedIn, I have only displayed and stored my Gmail address. So all of my connections have only gotten my Gmail address, and that's very likely what you'll get when you become connections. There's a 50% chance. And a personal email address is less valuable than a business email address. And so that's something to factor in. Now let's talk about pros and cons for sending LinkedIn emails to the LinkedIn email inbox. So one thing is that when you're prospecting, if you're calling and you're emailing and you're not getting a hold of someone, when you're able to send messages to someone's LinkedIn email inbox, that's an additional way to communicate to them. I've mentioned that it's very difficult to connect with and get a hold of people and get their attention. Well, you should try to contact them multiple times and in multiple ways. And adding a LinkedIn inbox is adding an additional way. So you're just continuing to reinforce all of your other communications. It should not be the only way that you try to communicate, but when you add it to your other mix, you're increasing the different ways that you're communicating and increasing the odds that you're able to get your message through and get connected and get someone's attention. And that's really the only pro for communicating to the prospect's LinkedIn inbox. On the other side of that is that you need to keep in mind that a prospect does not look at their LinkedIn inbox in the same way or as much as they do their business email inbox, meaning they're always looking at their regular email on their phone every time they open their computer throughout the day. They're looking at their LinkedIn inbox much less, and it's a lot easier for emails to get lost. It's good to assume that someone's much more organized and on top of and looking at their business email inbox, and so emails can get lost. Another thing to factor in is that the LinkedIn inbox email viewer window is much smaller than really any other inbox that you might have. And what that means is that when you send messages to your prospect, your message will look longer than it really is or than it would in a regular inbox. What that means is that a prospect will have to scroll more in order to read your email. And if they're having to scroll more, the instant delete rate could be faster and more likely in the LinkedIn inbox. Now let's talk about sending traditional email to contacts or prospects. And so this is sending just a regular email to someone's normal inbox. And so one is that contacts are going to look at their regular email inbox much more frequently throughout the day. Technically, you don't need to become connections to send someone that you find on LinkedIn an email. A lot of times people send invitations to connect just to get the email address, but the reality is that you don't have to do that. You don't have to become connections even if you don't have their email address, because you can guess their email address. And let me show you what I mean by that. If someone works at a company and you know that the website address for that company and you know their first name and their last name, most likely their email address is some combination of those three values. Here are the way those three pieces of information are put together to create email addresses in the business world. You can get these three pieces of information from LinkedIn in a matter of seconds. You click on someone's profile and you'll have this in a matter of 10, 15 seconds. What that means is then you could send an email and guess their email address. You could go through this list and use the most common formats, shoot off an email. If it bounces back, you know you guessed wrong, and then you can send another email after that. Now, this actually works. With about 3 to 4 at the most guesses, you'll eventually have one that stops coming back. And so this works. If you're trying to contact a handful of executives, this is not that big of a deal. You can do some guessing and get their email addresses. Now, if you have a territory and you have hundreds of contacts, or you're reaching out to a bunch of people every day, this can actually become a bit cumbersome, because you shoot off an email, then you start working on something else, then the bounced email comes back, and then you have to go back. And I will not deny that this is cumbersome, but I actually have something for you, which is in the Sales Scripter software application. We have a tool that does all that work for you and makes it much less cumbersome, in that we have a tool called the Email Guesser, and you basically plug in those three values: first name, last name, email address, and the software runs all those different combinations and does a test ping on each combination, and will give you a readout of this is the good email address and these are all invalid. And from there, you can then shoot an email to that contact. So this takes all the guesswork really out of it. And with the email guesser, when you're using LinkedIn, you can find prospects in your territory or in the accounts you're trying to get into, guess their email address, and then you can actually skip becoming connections. And then what you can do is, because you're not connections, you don't have to worry about being less direct about selling to them. You can be more direct about who you are and why you're reaching out, so you don't have to be cautious. So that's actually what we recommend. We use LinkedIn internally at SalesScripter. We don't establish connections, we guess email addresses. So we find the people on LinkedIn, and then we're sending primarily email addresses to their business account. And by the way, we're not ending up in their personal inbox because we're not getting those personal email addresses from LinkedIn profiles. Now let's look at calling the prospect, some pros and cons. The majority of people that are just doing LinkedIn prospecting, they're not calling anybody. All they're doing is sending emails, and that's going to greatly reduce their effectiveness. And what I would say is that if you simply add the element of calling someone in addition to your LinkedIn messages or everything else you're doing on LinkedIn, you're going to stand out and you're going to be doing more than the majority. I think that there's a big part of that aren't doing both, right? So if they're on LinkedIn, they feel like, oh, I just became connections, I shouldn't call this person, then that would seem stalkerish. You don't need to worry about that, and you're going to improve your odds of connecting. And there's nothing wrong with calling people you connect with on LinkedIn. And there's no real cons to calling the prospect other than it is kind of time consuming and grinding and difficult to get a hold of people.